quickly. Settle down.
A cherry, or FNG, was a term for recruits fresh from the United States who joined pre-existing units in Vietnam. Since most units were already in country, every unit had a fresh batch of cherries most of the time. The term was used across all unit types, from frontline combat through support and medical units. The cherry phenomenon grew out of the U.S. military's individual rotation policy during the Vietnam War. During the war, individual troops were rotated in and out of the country with already deployed units in Vietnam. The tour of duty was 12 months for the Army, 13 months for the Marines. In other modern American wars before and since, military units have been maintained and have deployed as a whole. This policy was adopted because of the Cold War. The United States military faced the need of maintaining a large presence of combat troops not only in Southeast Asia, but in Korea and Western Europe as well. The Johnson administration lacked the political capital and will that would have been required to call up the National Guard and Reserves or to convince Congress to extend the tours of duty of draftees beyond 24 months. Lacking sufficient Army and Marine ground combat units to sustain a unit-based rotation strategy, the individual rotation policy was adopted. Cherries were an important part of the group dynamic of U.S. units in Vietnam. Their treatment had at its core an overall sense of us, those with experience, and them, those who were back in the United States. It was in combat units that the cherry was truly ignored and hated by his fellow soldiers. A cherry in a combat unit was treated as a non-person, a pariah to be shunned and scorned, almost vilified, until he passed that magic, unseen line to respectability. On the surface, such treatment of new members in the unit happened for simple survival reasons. New recruits had a higher attrition rate than experienced troops, and the small units of veteran jungle warfare troops simply saw them as a liability. They talked too loud and made too much noise while moving around, didn't know what to take into the bush or even how to wear it properly, couldn't respond to basic combat commands, fired too much ammo, and tended to flake out on even the easiest 10-click moves. Beyond mere survival, though, there were deeper reasons for veterans to hate the newcomers. The new guys represented those men who were still in America, and this fomented resentment. A unit would attach an almost mystical quality to any members of the unit with prior combat experience. The new guy was expected to live up to the same standard and would not be accepted into the group until he had made a name for himself. The monster that was Vietnam ate up manpower at a hellish rate. Tours were completed, men were wounded, body bags were filled. Every unit needed a new body. For that reason, troops had little time to get acquainted with the country and its climate once they got off the plane from the States.
I was a PFC at that time, and I got to Phu Bai. We flew into Da Nang, or after stay about a week on Okinawa. Of course, we flew commercial flights. Now you figure you got about 200 Marines on this plane, and it's a civilian plane, and of course you got stewardesses on it, and everybody's making a pass at stewardess for what, I don't know, you know. But once you got on the ground, and of course they want to get you on the ground and get you off, refueled, and get out of there. But we flew in and when they opened the door, immediately the whole plane filled with the smell. And it's kind of a cross between like really hot, rotting vegetation and what we used to call the honey pots. And that's the crappers, where they take it out and then burn that and then dump it out. And it's just the smell, and the smell stays with you the entire time you're there.
When I got off the plane, I was one of the first replacement troops into Vietnam. When I got off the plane, they took us by bus over to 1st Division headquarters there in Da Nang, and then over to Red Beach, where regimental headquarters was located. And there happened to be an ARVN compound on either side of our regimental headquarters. One compound was Buddhist, one was Catholic, and they were involved in a firefight across the regimental headquarters. So we ducked through the headquarters there. I picked up my rifle and my web gear and my helmet, and they said, well, we'd like to have you stay overnight, but we're sending you out to your unit. And I was put on a truck and went out to Hill 55, which is out towards Happy Valley, a little bit to the southwest of Da Nang. And I reported into my unit.
When we got there, the heat was stifling. I mean, as soon as they shut off the engines, you needed a towel just to wipe the sweat off. And I couldn't help but notice that when we were departing the plane, the guys that had been there and were returning home from Vietnam were all rough looking. I, hadn't showered for a while, and they yelled at us, "You'll be sorry." And they were pretty much right.
There are two kinds of Marines. Ones that say they're afraid, and ones that say they're not afraid. Ones that say they're not afraid are either nuts or they're liars. It's macho as a youngster to pretend that you aren't afraid. But fear is when people are trying to kill you, you are afraid. You either overcome that fear and react to that threat, or you give in to that fear and you run. There was no place to go in Vietnam. You couldn't get on the plane and come home without orders. And until you got to the end of your tour, you didn't get orders. I imagine a few Marines disappeared and then went through Laos, Cambodia, over into Thailand. But every Marine I know felt that there was no way home except on that big silver bird. You either had to be medevaced or be in a body bag or have orders to get sent home.
You get off the plane and then you report to the transient variants. Now, nobody's armed, we're just we got a sea bag and just our stateside fatigue uniforms, utility uniforms. And then they assign you to where you're going. And my assignment was the headquarters 3rd Marine Division. At that time was in Phu Bai. So they trucked us from Da Nang to Phu Bai. It was about maybe, I'm just saying, I can't hardly remember, probably about 2 hours, 2.5 hours on truck. No flak jackets, no gear, no 782 gear, nothing, No weapons. And they got in Phu Bai, and that's where we drew our weapons and our 782 gear, our web gear and packs and things like that.
I think one of the most destructive things to me was the idea that the day I got there, I knew how many days it was until I came home. I think that was a mistake, because I dreamed, as every guy did, there must have been a million different ways to keep track of time. And you always wanted to see one more sun come up one more time, and you knew 365 days hence you'd be able to get on one of those big birds and come back to the land of the big PX, we called it.
And you're sitting in this civilian aircraft wondering if it's ever going to do what he thinks he wants it to do, and then you level off and you're looking at the waves, and then whoop, you're on the runway. After that, it didn't seem too scary. But that was your introduction to Vietnam. And then took you into the division, worked you down through regiment, through battalion. They finally linked you up with your company, and you're sitting on a hill one night with the company commander and another platoon commander, and there's a firefight going on down below, and he says, "That's you tomorrow morning." So, welcome.
From PFC to company commander, every Marine ordered to Vietnam had to face a first night, a first trial by fire.
Before us going to Vietnam, I was scared to death. You know, even though I was a trained soldier, I was a drill instructor, I had trained soldiers to go to Vietnam. By this time, I did have the fear in my heart, and when I was alerted, it was September 1967, and I didn't go over to, I left on leave in December, and I went to Vietnam in January. But one thing happened to me, that a great wake-up for me, was that when I reported to Vietnam, I was at the reception station. About the second night I was there, they blew up the ammo dump. That was a shock for me. I mean, you could feel the impact from the explosion. Now, that opened my eyes. I knew I was in a real war zone.
I went on individual orders, and so I had to break up with the guys that I'd flown over with. And got a commuter flight from Cam Ranh Bay into Pleiku, which is where the home base of the unit that I was going with was stationed. Then I would go from the headquarters company out to the field, wherever it was. So we flew a small Army charter, a Caribou or something out there, and in taking the bus from the airport to Camp Anari at Pleiku, that's when we had to really drive through the countryside. And we're a little bit fearful because on both sides of us we could see the countryside and civilians walking around, and here we're in a bus and there's no armed guard, and we drove by an Esso station that had been thoroughly shot through with, must have been 10,000 bullet holes. And then we noticed that there was chicken wire over the windows of the bus. And up to that point, all of us, there was maybe 50 of us on the bus that had come in from different areas and were staged there in Camp Anari. And we had been joking around, and Vietnam really up to that, the war itself up to that point was somebody else's war, until that moment when we saw that we were driving down the road and there's hooches going by on both sides, and you could see the chicken wire on the windows. And somebody asked the driver, why was there chicken wire on the windows? We couldn't get out of the bus, we can't get out. And they said, well, it's not meant to stop you from getting out of the bus. It's meant from a grenade to stop from coming in, because a couple of weeks earlier, somebody had tossed a grenade in the window and it had killed several people. And at that time, the emotions, the joy that usually goes along with being young and bulletproof and full of the youthful emotions of a 21-year-old or a 20-year-old, something changed. It got serious. It got quiet. And because I think at that moment was the first time that we had a chance to, as young men, take a look at the limits of our own mortality. We really had to look and say, hey, we could die over here, really. And it changed on that bus trip, and that was the beginning. And that's when I really got a sense that this was not somebody else's war. This was mine.
At 17, I was lacking a lot of social skills. I went in the Marine Corps rather than learning how to handle relationships and deal with things like love and stuff. I was learning to kill people. And for 6 years, most young men are honing their social skills. 6 years I spent as a Marine. My job was to kill people. About my second day in country, I came to believe I would never see 19 years old. When I saw 19, and I was still alive, and I knew that I had lost something. And when I looked inside myself, I didn't like what I saw. I elected to stay in country. I justified it with several things. I said, well, if I stay here, that's another dumb Marine, doesn't have to come over and maybe get killed. But what I really saw was somebody I didn't want to see running around the States. I didn't trust my emotions. I saw a dark side of me that I didn't like real well. And I was looking for something, I didn't know what then. As I look back on it, I was trying to find my youth and innocence. I never did find it.
It took me about a week to get to my unit because I got there the 25th of January, which was about a week before the Tet Offense. And it started when I was there. And watching all these soldiers, they were shipping them back when I went to Da Nang. I was watching them ship all these soldiers back. I went to Phu Loy, right? Watching them ship these soldiers back in bags and stuff to be shipped out to Da Nang. And the American unit right outside Phu Loy base, all of them had been killed, you know. That was a shocker. That was an eye-opener. I said to myself, oh, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And the first night they said, well, we've got approximately a battalion of Viet Cong out in the immediate vicinity, and we expect to get hit anytime. And you've got hole watch tonight. The unit was so short-handed at the time that they had a Navy corpsman standing hole watch with me. I had the first watch, and it was pitch dark, pitch black. Couldn't see your hand if you waved it in front of your face. And it was raining, and it was miserable. And there was a 155 howitzer next to the hole we were in. And without warning, after the corpsman relieved me, I pulled a poncho over my head and tried to get some sleep. And then without warning, they fired that 155, and I could see the muzzle flash through the poncho and through my eyelids. And I thought that we'd taken incoming and that I was dead. I was afraid to open my eyes. And when I finally realized that I was still alive, I realized that ever since we got off the plane, I had been terrified. And that carried on. That fear, as time went on, the fear turned more into anger. This low-lying fear I think most of us had that would turn instantly into rage whenever we had contact with Viet Cong.
You're coming out into an open area, and across the rice paddies there was a tree line, and all of a sudden you heard the opposite sound of a rifle. When you were always in training, you were on the backside, and it sounds completely different when on the receiving side. There's just a crack, and you hear a loud report going past or around you. You were lucky if you could see some flashes. Most of the time you couldn't, so you just start working your way up and down the hedgerows across the field, trying to bring in fire. And you would be doing this for an hour, 2 hours at a time, and when it was all over, you'd look at your watch, and you could not believe that the time was gone. It felt like 5 minutes, yet it was 2 hours. The time just flew. So you never had time to think. You were mostly reacting and moving, and just getting people to do what they were supposed to do. And 9 times out of 10, they knew what to do. The hardest thing was to coax the radio operator closer. He was always behind a big tree or a rock. He says, "Hey, I'm staying here. You go where you want to go. I'll get a longer handset, a cord on the handset." I said, "Come here." So they were careful, but they were good too. You'd call in for an artillery strike, and 5 duds would come in, and then the next day you'd walk into 5 105 booby trap rounds. And there was always a constant reminder. Somebody would take their flak jacket off for a minute, drop it behind them, and set off a booby trap. Somebody'd step into a punji pit, whatever, and or set off a booby trap up on a point. And I don't want to say you ignored it, but you tried not to let it get to you. It got to you. I lost somebody one time, and I was going back to the rear to identify the body, and I just pulled off the road with the Jeep and just broke. And the driver took one look at me, and I said, "Give me a few minutes." And that was it. And he got back in and kept going. Many times you didn't have the luxury of time to sit down and think about it. And it's not that you didn't, you did, and it's not that you ignored it. You tried to make the best of the situation at the time.
No, I wasn't. Amazingly, it was, it's just a miracle that I wasn't. A lot of people that I went in country with were hit. Of course, being new over there, a lot of them I didn't know that were hit, and being kind of, young, and at the time I thought sheltered life. Never seen a dead person laying out in field before, and that gives you an altogether different feeling. It gives you a different outlook on life. Seeing people, you've watched TV and the John Wayne movies and things like that. Guy jump up and charge a machine gun, things like that. I always thought that was just Hollywood. It does happen. It's not because the guy is wanting to be a hero or something, but it's because just something snaps, or it's something that had to be done at the time, and it's done,
Sometimes it was the new guy who had to deal with the loss of a friend.
I made the mistake of getting close to one man when I first got to Vietnam. A black Marine by the name of Larry Washington. As a new guy in Vietnam, we were called FNGs, cherries, till we drew blood. And people didn't get close to us because the new guy was likely to get killed. He didn't know anything. Larry Washington and I became close. He's the only one that would talk to me when I first got there, and we got real close. In August of '66, he had 3 weeks left to go on his tour, and he got killed. I was with him. He got killed. We lost several people in our unit. The unit eventually was sent back to Okinawa, and I was transferred to MACV. And it's still difficult for me to let people get too close. I've been in several relationships. As soon as people start getting too close, then I have a habit of leaving the relationship.
Friends may come and go, but Vietnam would be with the Marines forever.